The Class 5 death world known as Xylos did not entertain visitors, it systematically dissolved them. Its atmosphere was a heavy, bruising purple haze that wept a high-concentration nitric acid torrent capable of stripping armor plating down to raw alloy within a single afternoon. Forests did not consist of ordinary flora, but rather aggressive, self-regenerating ironwood and thickets of petrified cellulose that waged an unceasing, brutal war for soil and sunlight. Every living thing on the surface was trapped in an evolutionary arms race driven entirely by mutual slaughter, where survival was measured in desperate heartbeats rather than years. Amidst this boiling cauldron of chemical waste and violent predation, a small survey craft had plummeted from the upper atmosphere months prior, burning away its stabilizers and leaving a single survivor in its wake. Alex Vance, a former chief structural surveyor, found himself entirely isolated after his crew was lost in the initial impact. He possessed no heavy artillery, no military-grade defense shields, and no functional long-range communication relay. Equipped only with a rugged toolkit, a pneumatic cable launcher, and a mind trained in structural integrity, Alex looked down at the acidic, rotting graveyard of the jungle floor and made a critical tactical decision. He realized immediately that fighting the local ecosystem was a losing battle. Instead of trying to dominate the wilderness with brute force, he looked upward, locking his sights onto the towering silhouette of a 400-year-old iron crumb tree that dominated the valley. Its trunk was over 20 meters thick, and its bark was naturally impervious to acid corrosion, secreting a foul sulfurous compound that repelled the dangerous subterranean burrowers. Utilizing his cable launcher, Alex anchored himself 35 meters above the hostile ground, setting the foundation for a life-saving architectural project that would completely redefine his survival. Over the subsequent weeks, Alex worked with a disciplined, methodical rhythm, consciously avoiding loud power tools or pneumatic hammers that might echo across the basin and attract deadly cloud-stalking predators. He relied entirely on silent diamond wire hand saws, manual gear winches, and tension-locked composite ties salvaged from the wreckage of his fallen shuttle. Layer by layer, he constructed the primary deck frame using lightweight aluminum support beams and thick, resin-sealed ironwood planks designed to resist the warping effects of the relentless ambient humidity. The centerpiece of his construction was an overhanging, multi-tiered roof angled precisely at 35 degrees, engineered specifically to shed the brutal nitric rain directly into a central collection trough. From there, the toxic precipitation was funneled through a custom 4-stage filtration array lined with crushed charcoal, ion exchange resin, and silver-coated mesh, miraculously transforming caustic poison into crisp, clean drinking water. By the time the sky darkened with the purple hues of an incoming storm, the primary living cabin was fully insulated, outfitted with a small bio stove, a suspended hammock, and a sturdy wraparound deck. This meticulous structural approach proved that human survival on a death world did not depend on raw aggression, but rather on intelligent environmental management. Alex engineered his cabin to be an autonomous ecosystem that worked with the tree rather than against it, utilizing the natural strength of the petrified cellulose to absorb violent wind gusts without a single tremor. As he sat inside his insulated quarters sipping warm tea while the acid rain sizzled harmlessly against his angled roof, he felt a quiet sense of triumph, completely unaware that his architecture was about to attract the most terrifying neighbors imaginable. The true test of Alex's sanctuary arrived during a Category 4 acid storm, when the barometer plunged rapidly and the sky turned a menacing shade of bruised violet. A heavy, weighted thud slammed against the eastern edge of his wraparound deck, accompanied by the heavy, rhythmic vibration of biological movement that made his tea slosh over the rim of his mug. Creeping cautiously toward the reinforced observation port with a rivet gun in hand, Alex pulled back the insulation curtain and stared out into the rain-swept darkness in absolute astonishment. Lying huddled against the far corner of the deck, wedged tightly beneath the broad overhang of the roof, was a massive Obsidian Stalker, a 10-foot-long quadrupedal apex predator possessing glossy chitinous armor and razor-sharp climbing claws. Under normal circumstances, encountering a stalker meant immediate, brutal death, but this beast was caught completely exposed in the storm, and thick plumes of stinging white steam were rising from its flanks where the nitric rain had eaten away its protective shoulder plates. It was shivering violently, whimpering in a low wet frequency as it pressed its raw, chemical-burned side against the cold wooden decking. Instead of firing his weapon, Alex paused, locking eyes with the beast through the double-paned safety glass and noting the sheer, universal desperation of a dying creature trying to escape the burning downpour. Understanding that shooting it would only result in a destructive, violent thrashing that would ruin his deck, Alex made a radical choice that defied all standard survival protocols. He reached out and flipped the toggle switches for the deck's auxiliary heating grid, sending a surge of electrical resistance power straight into the ironwood floorboards beneath the monster. Within seconds of flipping the switches, the deck surface warmed to a comfortable 32 degrees Celsius, radiating gentle, dry heat directly into the freezing air beneath the eaves. Simultaneously, Alex activated the manual flush valve for his external water system, releasing a fine, wide mist of neutralized alkaline water from the spray nozzles mounted along the outer roofline to wash away the harsh acid. Outside, the stalker stiffened in surprise as the stinging chemical fire in its flesh suddenly cooled, replaced by the soothing, cleansing mist and the comforting warmth rising through its underbelly. The massive beast let out a long, shuddering exhale, a deep raspy breath that blew a cloud of condensation across the cabin window as it relaxed its 6 long legs along the heated boards. It made no attempt to claw at the door or break through the reinforced glass, choosing instead to rest its heavy armored chin flat against the warm surface and drift into a quiet, peaceful sleep just inches away from the humans' living quarters. By dawn, when the storm cleared and the sun broke through the sulfuric clouds, the stalker was already back on its feet, giving Alex one long, silent look before leaping effortlessly back into the misty canopy. This extraordinary encounter fundamentally shifted Alex's perspective on his survival strategy, proving that comfort and hospitality could bridge the gap between man and monster on a world defined by cruelty. He realized that if his shelter was going to serve as a recurring haven, he needed to modify the architecture to prevent accidental territorial standoffs. Over the next 3 days, he worked tirelessly with aluminum sheeting and spare timber to partition his wide wraparound porch into distinct, semi-private guest bays complete with individual heating pads and water troughs. The newly partitioned porch quickly transformed the survival outpost into a fully operational refuge that the local wildlife began treating like an upscale mountain resort. Scale wolves, massive pack predators with vicious territorial instincts, began scaling the rubberized entry ramps during severe acid storms, crowding into the heated bays to protect their injured packmates from the chilling drafts. Although initial proximity sparked low, rumbling growls through the wooden partitions, Alex maintained absolute authority over his establishment with a simple, brilliant system of control. Whenever a territorial dispute threatened to break out between competing predators separated by mere inches of treated timber, Alex utilized his remote intercom and power switching console to manage his guests. If the scale wolves or the Obsidian Stalkers began baring their fangs or scratching at the wooden dividers, Alex would instantly cut the electrical power to the floor heating grid in their specific bays and fire a quick burst of compressed air through the overhead vents. The sudden loss of comforting warmth combined with the sharp draft immediately startled the beasts into absolute silence. 10 seconds of dead silence were all it took for the animals to remember the rules of the lodge, prompting Alex to flip the heating switches back on and restore the soothing warmth to their respective corners. Creatures that would normally tear each other to shreds on the jungle floor now shared the same elevated deck, bound entirely by a mutual fear of the exterior acid storms and an unspoken understanding that bad behavior meant losing access to the heat. Alex settled into his stool by the observation port, watching his diverse array of guests rest peacefully and feeling like the master architect of an impossible oasis. The fragile, peaceful ecosystem of the Canopy Lodge faced its ultimate environmental test late one night when the cabin's digital barometer let out a harsh, continuous screech, signaling a catastrophic barometric crash. The external temperature plummeted 20 degrees in less than 10 minutes, transforming the tropical humidity into a swirling, pale blue fog of microscopic ice crystals and razor-sharp fungal spores known as the Great Spore Freeze. This planetary event turned standing water into jagged sheets of ice and threatened to suffocate any living creature that remained unprotected on the freezing forest floor below. Alex moved swiftly across his living quarters, hitting manual overrides on his environmental control panel to maximize the output of his bio-stove and redirecting auxiliary storage battery power straight into the exterior deck's heating grids. To combat the deadly, suffocating fog, he activated a specialized high-pressure air curtain along the outer roofline, creating an invisible barrier of warm, filtered oxygen that blew outward and pushed the pale blue spores away from the open guest bays. The system hummed at 85% capacity, struggling desperately to keep the floorboards at a comfortable 30 degrees Celsius against the biting Arctic draft. Outside on the deck, the sudden flash freeze created a wave of intense panic among the resting animals, causing scale wolves, stalkers, and canopy hounds to press themselves flat against the warm wood and tuck their snouts beneath their tails. Just as Alex was monitoring the strain on his power reserves, a deep, earth-shaking vibration traveled up the core of the iron crumb tree, making the support beams hum with a terrifying frequency. A massive, 30-foot subterranean gloom crawler, an armored, centipede-like titan forced out of the frozen soil, was violently clawing its way up the rubberized ramp in a desperate bid for unfrozen air. The emergence of the 30-foot gloom crawler onto the deck threatened to shatter the delicate truce of the lodge, as every scale wolf and stalker stiffened instantly and bared their teeth in anticipation of a chaotic riot. Recognizing that a physical confrontation with the massive subterranean titan would completely obliterate his porch, Alex acted with lightning-fast authority over the intercom system. He barked a calm, commanding warning to his guests while simultaneously rerouting maximum thermal power to Bay 3, which was currently empty, raising its floor temperature to a scorching 35 degrees. "Over here, big guy," Alex muttered into his console, tapping the observation glass to draw the monster's attention toward the warm, brightly lit enclosure filled with fresh oxygen and comforting radiant heat. Drawn by the irresistible warmth, the giant burrower slithered its long, segmented body past the other bays, sliding its massive length neatly into the prepared enclosure as its frozen underbelly made contact with the heated ironwood boards. The creature let out a low, vibrating click that sounded like grinding stones, coiling its massive body into a tight, neat spiral and resting its terrifying head flat against the warm wood. As the ice on the gloom crawler's shell melted into harmless water drops, a young scale wolf in the adjacent bay let out a high-pitched, nervous growl at the sight of the giant centipede sleeping just inches away. Before Alex could even reach his microphone, the veteran Obsidian Stalker in Bay 1 issued a single, deep, irritated huff through the floorboards, effectively silencing the wolf and restoring total order to the lodge. Alex shook his head in quiet disbelief, watching through the glass as the most terrifying predators on the planet slept side by side in undisturbed harmony through the peak of the freezing night. The icy blue fog of the great spore freeze finally dissipated as the twin suns of Xylos crested the horizon, casting a warm golden radiance across the glistening canopy and allowing the lodge's guests to depart peacefully into the thawing jungle. High above the atmosphere, however, a heavily armored recon shuttle belonging to the United Earth Coalition, the UEC Sentinel, broke through the planet's upper orbital threshold with its thrusters burning bright against the black void of space. Inside the cramped tactical command bay, Captain Marcus Vance adjusted the straps of his heavy combat armor while scanning glowing holographic telemetry floating above the console. The pilot announced over the internal comms that they had a solid lock on the long-lost distress beacon, with coordinates pointing directly to Sector 9 deep in the Ironwood Basin for a fast sweep and immediate extraction. The survival probability for survey engineer Silas Vance was officially estimated by command at 0.0%, prompting Captain Marcus to brief his 4 elite shock troopers on the extreme hazards of the Class 5 Death World hotspot. He warned them that the nitric rain would melt their faces off and local apex fauna would chew them out of their armor before they could even fire a single pulse rifle burst. The heavy blast doors of the shuttle slid open with a hydraulic hiss, and the 4 shock troopers unclipped their repelling lines, plummeting through the cloud layer and firing short thruster bursts as they dropped toward the towering silhouette of the iron crumb tree. Their boots slammed heavily onto the polished ironwood deck 35 meters above the forest floor, sending a sharp echo through the surrounding canopy and causing the lead trooper to immediately raise his weapon. He shouted instantly over the open comms that they had multiple heavy thermal signatures surrounding the drop zone, reading at least 8 Apex-class biologicals in dangerously close proximity. Captain Marcus hit the deck a second later, unholstering his heavy plasma pistol and ordering his squad to form a tight defensive circle as their tactical visor HUDs flashed red warning icons. Expecting an immediate, horrific bloodbath against the deadliest monsters of Xylos, the captain raised his weapon and prepared to open fire the moment the fog cleared around the edge of the porch. Instead, a calm, booming human voice cut straight through the tense hum of their plasma chargers, telling them to lower their weapons before they gave his guests an ulcer. The fog parted under the morning breeze, revealing a sight that made every single shock trooper freeze in absolute, slack-jawed astonishment near the doorway of a sprawling, beautifully constructed wooden canopy lodge. Standing casually in a soft fleece thermal sweater was Silas Vance himself, holding a steaming mug of mint tea in one hand and a wooden broom in the other as he leaned against a hand-carved railing. Captain Marcus stared at the survivor in complete disbelief, slowly looking past him to process the unbelievable scene of apex predators resting in domestic harmony inside the partitioned bays. In Bay 1, the Obsidian Stalker lazily lifted its massive armored head, giving the armed troopers a tired, annoyed glare before tucking its snout back under its tail to resume sleeping, while white-furred scale wolves in Bay 2 contentedly lapped clean water from a heated stainless steel trough. When one of the terrified shock troopers stepped backward and accidentally bumped against a wooden partition, the stalker let out a short, stern huff that clearly communicated its desire for absolute quiet. Captain Marcus stammered out the engineer's name, asking what in the name of the coalition this impossible place actually was. Silas took a calm sip from his mug, sweeping a small pile of stray wood shavings off the porch threshold and welcoming them warmly to the canopy lodge while advising them to wipe their boots on the rubber mat. He explained that survival on a death world wasn't about having the biggest gun, but rather about building a place where the pain stops and having the common sense to leave the door open for anyone needing shelter. As the shock troopers slowly holstered their weapons in a daze of profound wonder, Captain Marcus shook the engineer's hand and admitted that command was going to need a much longer report than expected. However, as the captain looked out over the thriving canopy, he noticed something strange about the surrounding landscape that went far beyond mere architectural cleverness. The immediate 1,000-yard radius around the iron crumb tree was surrounded by lush, vibrant green foliage and clear, breathable air completely devoid of toxic spores. Marcus asked how a simple cabin could possibly alter the local atmosphere of a Class 5 death world so drastically without heavy terraforming equipment. Silas simply smiled, pointing toward the geothermal pump beneath his floorboards that cycled atmospheric gases to power his heating grid. The ultimate twist revealed itself. The geothermal pump relied on cycling high-purity methane and nitrous oxide through its system, and the harmless byproduct being vented outward was over 30 tons of high-grade oxygen and warm moisture every single hour. Silas Vance hadn't just built a hotel for monsters to survive the harsh storms. His cozy architecture and central heating had accidentally triggered the terraforming of the entire death world, proving that human ingenuity could transform a planetary hellscape simply by making it warm enough to breathe. If you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe my channel.